Have you ever felt so emotionally exhausted that you stopped believing in meaningful connections? That's exactly where I was when this story began. What happened next changed my entire perspective on love, timing, and the unexpected places where we find our soulmates. Stay till the end because I want to know, would you have made the same choices I did? And trust me, by the end of this story, you'll understand why this weekend changed everything. Let me paint you a picture of where I was mentally. It was a Thursday afternoon in late October. I was sitting in my office cubicle, staring at my computer screen, but not really seeing anything. The fluorescent lights buzz overhead like angry insects, and I could hear my coworkers chatting about their weekend plans, their dinner dates, their anniversary celebrations. Me? I was planning another weekend of Netflix, takeout, and pretending I wasn't slowly disappearing into my own loneliness. The dating apps on my phone had been deleted and re-downloaded more times than I cared to admit. Each conversation felt like a job interview where nobody got hired. Each coffee date felt like a performance where I was playing a character I didn't recognize. The last guy I'd gone out with, David, I think his name was, had spent the entire evening talking about his ex while scrolling through Instagram. When he suggested we keep it casual, I knew I was done, not just with him, with all of it. I'd reached that point where being alone felt safer than being disappointed again. You know that feeling? When you've been let down so many times that hope starts to feel like a luxury you can't afford. That's when Devin appeared at my cubicle with a cup of coffee and a concerned expression. "You look like someone stole your lunch money," he said, perching on the edge of my desk. Devin and I weren't close. We shared elevator rides, exchanged pleasantries in the break room, and occasionally ended up at the same table during office lunches. He was friendly in that easy way some people have, not intrusive, just naturally warm. I knew he was in his late 20s, worked in marketing, and had recently broken up with his longtime girlfriend. Beyond that, we were essentially strangers who happened to work in the same building. "Just tired," I said, which was true but incomplete. He studied my face for a moment. "When's the last time you took a real break? Like left the city, breathed some actual air?" I couldn't remember. "It's been a while." "You know what? I've got this place upstate. Family cabin. My dad built it when I was a kid, and it's usually empty this time of year. Nothing fancy, but it's got everything you need. Decent Wi-Fi if you want to work, fully stocked kitchen, and the kind of silence that makes you remember what your own thoughts sound like." I raised an eyebrow. "You're offering me your family cabin? Why not? You look like you could use some peace and quiet." I was planning to go up there this weekend anyway, but I just got word about a client presentation that got moved to Saturday. Big account, can't miss it. He pulled out his phone and started scrolling. The place has been in our family for years. My dad goes up there sometimes to fish and fix things, but mostly it just sits empty. Seems like a waste. The idea was tempting, very tempting, but accepting felt like crossing some invisible line from Coworker to something else. "I don't know, Devin. That's really generous, but..." "Look," he interrupted, "I'm not trying to be weird about it. You just seem like someone who appreciates quiet spaces, and honestly, it would make me feel better knowing someone's checking on the place. Dad's been talking about winterizing it soon, but he's been putting it off." He grabbed a napkin from my desk and started writing. "Here's the address and the key code. The cabin's about 2 hours north of here. Take Route 87 until you hit the exit for Mill Creek, then follow the signs toward Pine Lake. You can't miss it." I stared at the napkin in my hands, feeling something I hadn't felt in months. Possibility. What if I break something? What if... "Then you break something," Devin laughed. "It's a cabin in the woods, not the Sistine Chapel. Just go. Disappear for a couple days. Read a book. Take a bath. Remember what it feels like to exist without an agenda. Before we continue with what happened at that cabin, I want to pause here. How many of you have been in that exact headspace I just described? That emotional exhaustion where you stop believing good things can happen? Let me know in the comments. I read every single one. And if you're enjoying the story so far, hit that subscribe button because, trust me, we're just getting started. Friday afternoon, I found myself throwing clothes into a weekend bag with more excitement than I'd felt in months. I told my boss I had food poisoning and would be out until Monday. Not entirely a lie, considering how sick I was of my current routine. The drive started in typical city fashion. Traffic, construction, the usual urban chaos. But as the miles accumulated and the buildings gave way to trees, something inside me began to unwind. I rolled down the windows despite the crisp October air, letting the scent of autumn leaves and wood smoke fill the car. There's something magical about that moment when you realize you've left your regular world behind. The radio station started getting fuzzy, picking up country music and local news from small towns I'd never heard of. My phone GPS kept losing signal, but I didn't care. I had handwritten directions, and for once in my life, getting lost didn't seem like a catastrophe. The trees grew taller and denser as I climbed into the mountains. Maples blazed orange and red against the darkening sky, and I found myself slowing down just to take it all in. When was the last time I'd noticed beauty without photographing it for Instagram? When had I stopped allowing myself to simply experience moments without documenting them? About an hour and a half into the drive, I stopped at a small general store for coffee and directions. The elderly woman behind the counter had the kind of weathered face that spoke of decades spent outdoors. "Pine Lake," she said when I showed her Devon's directions. "Oh, sure, honey. You're almost there. Another 15 minutes up the mountain. Beautiful spot, especially this time of year. You staying at one of the rental places?" "A friend's family cabin," I said. Her face brightened. "Which family? I know most of the folks up there. Devon mentioned his dad built it years ago." "Devon Harris? Mark's boy." She grinned. "Well, I'll be. That's a lovely spot they've got. Mark's a good man. Comes in here every few months for supplies. Lost his wife a while back. Divorced, I mean, but he's been doing well. Keeps that cabin in beautiful condition." I nodded politely, not sure how to respond to this unexpected biography of my weekend host family. Small towns, I reminded myself. Everyone knows everyone. You tell Mark that Betty says hello, won't you? And if you need anything while you're up there, groceries, firewood, whatever, just give us a call. We're open until 9 most nights. 20 minutes later, I was winding up a narrow gravel road bordered by towering pines. The sun was setting, casting everything in golden light that seemed almost too perfect to be real. My car's tires crunched on fallen leaves, and I could smell wood smoke drifting through the trees. And then I saw it. The cabin sat in a small clearing beside a pristine lake, looking like something from a postcard. It wasn't large, maybe 2 bedrooms, but it had that perfect rustic charm that only comes from years of loving care. The logs were weathered to a warm honey color, and smoke curled from the stone chimney. A wooden dock extended into the lake, and I could see an old rowboat tied to one of the posts. I parked next to a pickup truck I didn't recognize and sat for a moment, just taking it in. This was exactly what I needed. Silence, beauty, solitude. I grabbed my bag and walked up the stone path to the front porch, expecting to fumble with the key code Devon had given me. Instead, the door opened before I reached it. A man stood in the doorway, and my first thought was that I'd gotten the wrong cabin. He was older than me, maybe mid to late 40s, with broad shoulders that filled out a navy flannel shirt. His hair was dark with silver threading through it, and he had the kind of beard that suggested someone comfortable spending time outdoors. There was something immediately trustworthy about his face, laugh lines around deep brown eyes that were curly looking at me with polite confusion. "Can I help you?" he asked, and his voice had that warm, measured quality of someone who doesn't feel the need to fill silence with unnecessary words. My brain scrambled to catch up. I'm sorry. I think I might have the wrong place. I'm looking for the Harris cabin." Recognition dawned in his expression. "You must be Devon's coworker, the one who needed some quiet time." Relief flooded through me. "Yes, I'm sorry. I didn't realize anyone would be here." Devon said the cabin was empty this weekend. "It was supposed to be," he said with a slight smile. "I'm Mark, Devon's dad. He got called away to Los Angeles this morning for some client emergency. I figured that meant the weekend was off." I started backing toward my car. "Oh, I should go. I can find a motel in town, or—" "Hey, no need for that," he said, stepping out onto the porch. "I'm only up here doing some maintenance before winter sets in. Checking the pipes, looking at the roof, that sort of thing. There's plenty of space for both of us." I hesitated. The situation felt awkward in a way I couldn't quite define. "Are you sure? I don't want to impose." "You're not imposing. Devon specifically mentioned that you seem like you could use some peace and quiet. Besides," he gestured toward the lake, "it's too beautiful a weekend to spend in some roadside motel." There was something in his manner, not pushy, just genuinely kind, that made the decision easy. "If you're really sure it's okay?" "I'm sure. Come on in. I'll show you around." The interior was even more charming than the exterior. Warm wood paneling covered the walls, and a stone fireplace dominated one end of the main room. Comfortable-looking furniture was arranged to take advantage of the large windows facing the lake, and built-in bookshelves lined the walls. filled with everything from classic literature to local hiking guides. "This is incredible," I said, genuinely awed. "It's like something from a magazine." Mark's smile was pleased but modest. "Thanks. It's been a labor of love for about 20 years now. Started as a basic hunting cabin, but Devin's mom had particular ideas about comfort and aesthetics." There was something in the way he paused that made me look at him more closely, but he'd already moved on. "Guest rooms down that hallway," he continued, pointing past the kitchen. "Bathrooms right next to it. I'm upstairs in the loft, so you'll have the whole main floor to yourself. Kitchen's fully stocked. Help yourself to anything. I picked up groceries yesterday, thinking Devin was coming." "This is really kind of you," I said. "I hope I'm not disrupting your plans." He shrugged. "Plans were just fixing a loose board on the dock and cleaning out the gutters. Not exactly urgent. Besides, it'll be nice to have someone appreciate the place. I don't get up here as often as I should." I followed him into the kitchen, which managed to be both rustic and fully functional. A coffee maker sat on the counter next to a basket of fresh fruit, and I could see through the window that led to a small herb garden. "Do you mind me asking what you do for work?" I asked, partly from curiosity and partly to fill what felt like a comfortable but significant silence. "Architecture," he said, checking something in the refrigerator. "Mostly residential, some commercial. I specialize in sustainable design, buildings that work with their environment instead of fighting it." That explained a lot about the cabin's perfect integration with its surroundings. "What about you? Devin mentioned you work together, but not what you do." "Graphic design. Nothing as interesting as architecture, but I enjoy it most days." "Most days?" He turned to look at me with what seemed like genuine interest. "Well, lately it's been feeling a bit repetitive. Same clients, same projects, same creative challenges over and over." He nodded thoughtfully. "I know that feeling. Sometimes you need to step back to remember why you started doing something in the first place." There was wisdom in that observation that hit deeper than I expected. "Is that why you built this place?" I asked. "Partly," he said, leaning against the counter. "Mostly I built it because I needed somewhere to remember who I was outside of all the roles I was playing. Husband, father, business owner. Sometimes you need space to just be yourself." The way he said it made me wonder about the story behind those words. But before I could ask, he was moving toward the door. "I'll let you get settled. I was about to start dinner. Nothing fancy, just pasta and whatever vegetables I can find. You're welcome to join me, or there's plenty of sandwich stuff if you prefer eating alone." The offer was casual, but something in his manner suggested he hoped I'd say yes. "Dinner sounds great." I heard myself saying, "Can I help?" "Sure. You any good at chopping vegetables?" There's something intimate about cooking with someone you've just met. Not romantic, necessarily, but personal in a way that feels like fast-forwarding through months of small talk. Within minutes, we'd fallen into an easy rhythm. Me chopping bell peppers and zucchini, while Mark managed the pasta and what turned out to be a surprisingly sophisticated sauce. "Where did you learn to cook like this?" I asked, watching him add herbs with the confidence of someone who actually knows what they're doing. "Necessity," he said with a laugh. "When Devin's mom and I separated, I had two choices: learn to cook or live on takeout and frozen dinners. Devin was 12 and going through that phase where he'd only eat about 5 different foods, so I had to get creative." How long ago was that? 8 years now. Feels like yesterday and a lifetime ago, all at once. He stirred the sauce thoughtfully, and I got the sense there was more to that story. "Was it difficult?" "The separation, I mean." "Sorry, that's probably too personal." "No, it's okay," he said, glancing at me. "It was difficult, but not in the way people usually mean. The hard part wasn't losing her. We'd been more like roommates than spouses for years. The hard part was admitting to myself and everyone else that I'd spent 15 years trying to be someone I wasn't. The honesty in that statement caught me off guard. People don't usually share that kind of truth with strangers. "What do you mean?" I asked gently. He was quiet for a moment, testing the pasta. "Have you ever felt like you were living someone else's life? Like you'd made a series of decisions that made perfect sense at the time, but when you stepped back and looked at the whole picture, you didn't recognize yourself?" I stopped chopping and really looked at him. "Yeah, actually, I know exactly what you mean." Something shifted in his expression, a kind of recognition, like he was seeing me differently. "The divorce wasn't really about her," he continued. "It was about me finally admitting that I'd been trying to fit into a life that looked right for the outside, but felt wrong from the inside. And once I admitted that to myself, I couldn't unknow it." "What changed? I asked Devin partly, watching him become a teenager. Seeing him figure out who he was without apology, it made me realize I'd stopped doing that somewhere along the way. I'd gotten so focused on being what I thought a good husband and father should be that I'd forgotten how to just be myself. The pasta was ready, and we moved around each other easily, setting the small dining table by the window. Outside, the sun was setting over the lake, painting everything in warm gold and deep purple. "This looks amazing," I said as we sat down. "Wait until you taste it before you commit to that opinion," he said with a grin. But he was right to be confident. The food was delicious, not just edible, but actually restaurant quality. More importantly, the conversation that accompanied it was unlike anything I'd experienced in months. Mark had a way of asking questions that weren't invasive, but genuinely curious. He wanted to know about my work, my interests, what brought me joy and what frustrated me. And when I turned the questions back on him, he answered with a kind of thoughtful honesty that suggested someone who'd spent time thinking about these things. "So, what does stepping back look like for you?" he asked as we finished eating. "Besides escaping to mountain cabins, I laughed. "Honestly, I'm still figuring that out. I know I'm tired of dating people who don't actually see me. Tired of friendships that feel more like networking. Tired of feeling like I'm performing my life instead of living it. But knowing what you don't want isn't the same as knowing what you do want." "No," he agreed, "but it's a start. And sometimes you have to clear out the wrong things before you can make room for the right ones." After dinner, Mark suggested we take our coffee out to the porch. The temperature had dropped with the sun, but he brought out a couple of blankets, and the cold felt refreshing rather than uncomfortable. The lake was perfectly still, reflecting the stars that were beginning to appear in the darkening sky. The silence was profound, not empty, but full of all the sounds you don't notice in city. Water lapping gently against the dock, wind moving through the pine trees, the distant call of what might have been an owl. "This is incredible," I said, settling into one of the wooden chairs. "I've forgotten what actual quiet sounds like." "It takes some getting used to," Mark said. "The first few times I came up here alone, the silence almost drove me crazy. I kept wanting to turn on music or the TV, anything to fill the space. Now I crave it." "What changed?" "I learned to listen to myself instead of trying to drown myself out." We sat in comfortable silence for a while, both lost in our own thoughts. I found myself studying Mark's profile in the dim light from a cabin windows. There was something remarkably peaceful about his presence. Not the forced calm of someone trying to appear relaxed, but the genuine stillness of someone who'd found a way to be comfortable in his own skin. "Can I ask you something?" I said eventually. "Sure." "When you said you'd spent years trying to be someone you weren't, what did that look like? Day to day, He was quiet for so long that I started to worry I'd overstepped. Then he turned to look at me. "Have you ever felt attracted to someone but convinced yourself you weren't? Not because there was anything wrong with them, but because admitting the attraction would complicate your life in ways you weren't ready to handle?" My heart skipped a beat. "Yes," I said quietly. "For me, it was more than just attraction. It was about fundamentally misunderstanding who I was and what I needed to be happy. I spent years in a marriage trying to convince myself that the problem was circumstantial. Wrong timing, wrong pressures, wrong whatever. It took me way too long to admit that the problem was that I was trying to force myself into a life that didn't fit." "Because you were attracted to men," I said. It wasn't a question. "Because I was attracted to men," he confirmed. "And because I was too scared and too stubborn and too invested in being normal to admit that to myself, let alone anyone else." The honesty of that admission hung in the air between us. I could feel my pulse quickening, though I wasn't entirely sure why. "How did Devin take it? When you finally told him, Mark smiled. "Better than I expected, honestly. He was 16 by then, and apparently he'd figured it out before I had. He said, and I quote, 'Dad, I've been waiting for you to admit this for like 2 years. Can we order pizza now?' I laughed. That sounds like Devin. He's a good kid. Man, I should say. It's hard to remember he's not a teenager anymore." Mark paused. "What about you? Have you ever had to have those kind of conversations with family?" "Not exactly," I said. "My parents are supportive in theory, but we don't really talk about personal stuff. They know I date men, but we've never had any deep conversations about what that means or what I'm looking for." "Are you close to them?" "Closer than we used to be, but there's still this sense that we're all being polite with each other instead of being real. Like we're afraid that if we start being completely honest, we might discover we don't actually have as much in common as we think we do." "That's a lonely way to live," Mark said gently. "Yeah," I admitted. It really is. Another comfortable silence fell between us. The stars were fully visible now, more stars than I'd seen in years. In the city, light pollution washed out everything but the brightest celestial objects. Here, the sky was dense with points of light. I should probably head to bed soon, I said, though I didn't want to. There was something about this conversation, this moment, that I didn't want to end. Probably smart, Mark agreed. I'm planning to get up early to work on that dock repair. But feel free to sleep as late as you want. That's what weekends away are for. We stood up at the same time, and for a moment we were standing close enough that I could smell his cologne, something warm and woody that suited him perfectly. For just a second, I had the strangest urge to hug him, not romantically, but just as a thank you for the evening, for the conversation, for treating a stranger with such genuine kindness. Instead, I just said, thank you, for dinner, for the conversation, for letting me stay. This has been exactly what I needed. Thank you, he replied. I didn't realize how much I needed the company. The guest room was perfect. Comfortable bed, soft sheets, windows that opened to let in the cool mountain air. I should have fallen asleep immediately after the long drive and emotional conversation. Instead, I lay awake thinking about Mark's words, his story, the easy way we connected. There had been something in the air between us during that porch conversation. Not necessarily romantic, but a kind of recognition, like finding someone who spoke the same emotional language you did. I thought about what he'd said about spending years trying to fit into a life that looked right from the outside, but felt wrong from the inside. I'd never articulated it that way, but it described so much of my recent dating history. Men who looked good on paper, who checked all the boxes I thought I was supposed to care about, but who never quite felt like they actually saw me. Mark had seen me in just a few hours. He'd asked better questions and given more thoughtful responses than most people I'd spent months getting to know. But he was Devin's father, and he was probably 15 years older than me. And we just met, for crying out loud. I rolled onto my side and tried to force my mind to quiet down. Tomorrow would be a new day, and I'd probably discover that the connection I thought I'd felt was just a result of being in a beautiful place with a kind person after months of disappointing social interactions. Except I didn't really believe that. Around midnight, I heard footsteps in the main room, Mark, probably banking the fire or checking the locks. The sounds were reassuring rather than intrusive, reminding me that I wasn't alone in this beautiful, isolated place. Eventually, I drifted off to sleep, and I dreamed of conversations by firelight and eyes that seemed to understand things I hadn't yet learned how to say. I'm going to pause here because I can see in the comments that you're all invested in this story, and I want to know, are you feeling the same connection I was feeling? Sometimes you meet someone, and there's just this instant understanding, this sense that you're on the same wavelength. Have you experienced that? And what do you think I should have done with those feelings? Let me know your thoughts. And if you're loving this story, make sure you subscribe, because we're about to get to the part that changed everything. I woke to the smell of coffee and bacon drifting through the cabin. Sunlight was streaming through the guest room windows, and according to my phone, it was almost 9 o'clock, later than I'd slept in months. I pulled on jeans and a sweater and padded out to the kitchen, where Mark was standing at the stove with his back to me. He'd obviously been up for a while. His hair was damp from a shower, and he was dressed in work clothes. "Good morning," he said without turning around. "I hope I didn't wake you." I was trying to be quiet. "You didn't wake me. That smells incredible. Nothing fancy, just eggs and bacon. But there's fresh coffee in the pot if you want some." I poured myself a cup and leaned against the counter, watching him work. There was something deeply attractive about his competence, the way he moved around the kitchen with easy confidence. "Did you sleep well?" he asked, glancing over his shoulder. Eventually, I think it took a while for my brain to adjust to the quiet. "City brain," he said with understanding. "Takes a day or two to fully decompress." He plated the food and handed me a serving, then poured his own coffee and joined me at the table by the window. "So what's the plan for today?" I asked. "For me? Fix that loose dock board. Maybe tackle the gutters if the weather holds. For you? Whatever you want. There are hiking trails if you're feeling adventurous, or you could just sit by the lake with a book. No agenda required. Would you mind if I help with the dock? I'm not particularly handy, but I can hold things and hand you tools." Something in his expression shifted. "Please surprise, maybe. You want to spend your vacation weekend doing manual labor?" "I want to spend my vacation weekend doing something real with my hands instead of staring at a computer screen. Plus, you're being incredibly generous letting me stay here. The least I can do is make myself useful. In that case, I'd love the help." After breakfast, we walked down to the lake together. The morning was crisp and clear, with a light breeze rippling the water's surface. Mark had a toolbox and a small cooler filled with what he called work beer, which turned out to be bottles of water and a couple of energy bars. Safety first, he said with a grin. The dock repair was more involved than I had expected. One of the support boards underneath had rotted through, which meant Mark had to crawl partially under the structure to replace it. My job was to hand him tools, hold board steady, and provide what he jokingly called moral support and quality control. How did you learn to do all this? I asked, watching him work with the kind of skill that comes from years of practice. Necessity, mostly. When you own a place like this, you either learn to fix things yourself or you go broke paying other people to drive up here and fix them for you. Did your ex-wife help with this kind of stuff? He paused in his sawing. Linda was more of an indoor person. She liked the cabin for what it represented, family togetherness, getting away from the city, but she wasn't interested in the maintenance side of things. Can't say I blame her. Not everyone finds this kind of work relaxing. But you do. Yeah, I really do. There's something satisfying about fixing something with your own hands, seeing an immediate result from your effort. Architecture is rewarding, but it's abstract until the building actually gets built. This is immediate gratification. We worked in comfortable silence for a while, and I found myself watching the way his muscles moved under his shirt, the concentration on his face as he measured and cut. There was something undeniably attractive about his competence, his focus, the way his hands moved with such certainty. Can I ask you something personal? I said as he emerged from under the dock, slightly dusty, but grinning with accomplishment. Shoot. When you realized you were attracted to men, was there a specific moment, or was it more gradual? He sat back on his heels, considering the question. Both, I think. Looking back, I can see signs that were always there. But the moment I couldn't deny it anymore, he trailed off, looking out at the water. You don't have to answer if it's too personal. No, it's okay. There was this guy, a contractor I was working with on a commercial project about 10 years ago. Jake. He was smart, funny, completely comfortable with himself in a way that I envied. We started spending time together outside of work, just as friends, or so I told myself. And one night, we were having dinner at this little place downtown, and he was telling me some story about his weekend, and I suddenly realized that I was happier sitting across from him than I'd been in months of dinners with my wife. What happened? Nothing at first. I went home and convinced myself I was just lonely, that I was confusing appreciation for friendship with something else. But I couldn't stop thinking about him, and eventually I had to admit to myself that what I was feeling wasn't platonic. Did you ever tell him? Mark shook his head. He was straight, married, completely off limits in every way that mattered. But realizing how I felt about him forced me to examine how I felt about everything else. That's when I started to understand that the problems in my marriage weren't circumstantial. He stood up and brushed the dust off his jeans. What about you? Was there a moment when you knew? I thought about it as we gathered up the tools. I think I always knew, but I spent a lot of time trying to convince myself that everyone felt the way I did about men. Like, surely all guys notice when other guys were attractive, right? It took me embarrassingly long to realize that no, actually, straight men don't spend significant amounts of time thinking about kissing their male friends. Mark laughed. How long is embarrassingly long? College. I was 20 before I stopped trying to convince myself that everyone was secretly a little bit gay. 20's not that bad. I was 35 before I stopped trying to convince myself that I wasn't. The honesty of that admission hit me in the chest. That must have been difficult. It was terrifying, he said simply. But you know what was more terrifying? The idea of spending the rest of my life pretending. By the time we finished the dock repair, it was almost noon. We were both sweaty and tired, but satisfied with our work. The dock was solid again, and we'd managed to complete the project without any major disasters. I don't know about you, Mark said, but I could use a shower and some lunch. That sounds perfect. Back at the cabin, we took turns cleaning up. When I emerged from the bathroom, Mark was in the kitchen making sandwiches. I was thinking, he said without looking up from his work, there's this place about 20 minutes from here, Pine Ridge Brewery. They make their own beer and have really good food. Want to check it out for dinner tonight. That sounds great, I said, though something in my chest fluttered at the suggestion. Was he asking me on a date? Or was this just two people sharing a meal? Good. We can walk off all this manual labor. After lunch, we ended up on the couch together, supposedly reading but actually talking more than anything else. The conversation ranged from books to travel to childhood memories, and I was struck again by how easy it was to talk to him. "Can I ask you something?" Mark said during a lull in the conversation. "Sure. What made you say yes to coming up here?" "I mean, accepting an invitation from a coworker you barely know to stay at a cabin belonging to his family?" I considered the question. Honestly, desperation, maybe. Not desperate for company.